I'm Jason King, the Byrne Chair and Director for the Center for Catholic Studies at St. Mary's University. In today's episode, I talked with Dr. Allison Gray, Associate Professor of Theology and Greek here at St. Mary's University. She joined us for the Escobedo St. John's Bible Lecture Series. Her talk drew on her book, Reforming the Household of God. In this conversation, we talk about her background, how she became interested in Scripture, and how St. Paul might be helpful for Catholic higher education today. Welcome to Beyond the Lecture. Welcome, Allison. Thank you for joining us today for Beyond the Lecture. I wanted to start off by just asking you a little bit about your background. How did you end up getting into theology?
Okay, so I actually came into theology through a slant-wise path. I was a really weird little kid. When I was in third grade, I announced to my parents after watching Dead Poets Society, I'm going to be a college professor of English literature. And I stuck with that the whole time. I was like, I'm going to go to grad school. I'm going to study English. And then I got to college, and I had done some Latin in high school, and I went to a Catholic high school. And so when I got to college and was reading, British literature finally in a class, I realized that what I actually liked about it was how these books and authors are picking up on Greek mythology, early Christianity. A lot of the symbols from the Bible are there in this literature, and that was what was most interesting to me about what I was reading. So then I thought, maybe I should just cut back behind that and stop doing literary interpretation and go to the original texts. So I designed an interdisciplinary major in college. I went to one of those schools. So I was classics, religion, and English. And I did a senior thesis on Bridget of Ireland, who is a saint who was ordained as a bishop, even though she's a woman, and maybe is related to Bridget, an Irish goddess. I really haven't ever left that realm of 4th, 5th century texts about early Christian figures and how they are leaders and how they are connected to biblical texts. So it was sort of through English and then mythology, religion, that I got to New Testament.
That's really fascinating. It's amazing how many people I've spoken to that got to theology through some other sort of route, like math or science or politics or English, or it's just funny that somehow, I think something about the discipline, you're able to connect to it in a bunch of different ways, and that ability to think not just with the subject, but sort of all the connections that you have. I was a math major, so that was the thing that I went from math to philosophy. When I added the philosophy major, all of my professors said, oh yeah, we're all biologists here.
Right.
And so, but it was that sort of, it enabled you to kind of ask bigger questions, but not leave the things that you love sort of behind.
Yeah, and I think theology is interdisciplinary, like you're saying, and so there's room for me to do literary studies there. There's room for me to do history, and so those are the methods that I enjoy, and theology gives me material that I can use.
I used to tell students that I study this because it enables me to study everything. Anything that I'm kind of interested in, there's usually some kind of connection to that as well. That's pretty cool. For grad school, you went to University of Chicago,
Yes.
Is that correct?
Yeah.
And tell you a little bit about that experience. I've got friends that have went there, and their experience was very textual focused, very sort of analysis focused. So if you could just say a little bit about that experience.
Yeah, so I did the master's degree in the divinity school and then the PhD in a program that no longer exists, but is called New Testament Early Christian Literature.
Oh, yeah.
And it had no dedicated faculty in that department. They were all people from the div school or from classics or anthropology. So it was highly interdisciplinary, and that's actually my experience of Chicago, was just the opportunity to meet folks who were doing really different stuff than I was doing. They have a lot of grad student workshops, and so you can go and hear a paper on religion and animal studies by someone who works on medieval period.
Yeah.
I just absorbed so many things. And it wasn't always the most positive experience. It's a very rigorous place. I've had to study 5 languages to get my degree. That's fairly normal in biblical studies.
Latin, Greek.
Hebrew, French, and German. Yeah.
Very good.
So I need the ancient languages, right? And then you need the modern languages to read the scholarship. But it's incredibly rigorous. And I always felt while I was there that I was not up to snuff, because there are so many really, really smart people that you're studying with. Both really good and also a recipe for imposter syndrome, right? But I had a really good advisor who was quite tough. And pushed me and encouraged me and always supported the idea that although I'm at a Research One institution, what I want to do is go be at a small liberal arts college to teach. So I knew that I wanted to be primarily teaching, not focusing as much on research. And she was really supportive of that.
Did that help you in graduate school to kind of negotiate both imposter syndrome, the competition that sort of emerges? Graduate school is a funny place, but yeah. Psychologically funny, I should say.
Funny, haha, funny,
funny, like, panic funny.
I mean, it did because I knew what I wanted to do, so then researching can be really lonely. And I think that's the other thing about grad school. It's very isolating. And my advisor at one point said, like, you need to pick something that you're okay with, like going into a dark room and working on it alone for years. But I was teaching the whole time. And I was being a TA. I taught some language. I got to go be an adjunct at another university in town. And that reminded me of my purpose. And being in the classroom with students helps you come up with new ideas and new ways of asking questions, and that was really revitalizing for me.
Yeah, it helped me, the teaching I really liked, it helped me to think through ideas, not just because I was talking about them, but because I was conversing with students. But it also helped me to I don't know what it was, to make the research less stressful, like more enjoyable. Like there's so much sometimes high stakes if it's all about sort of the research, that it's got to be perfect. But if it's the teaching slant, because I spent most of my time at small liberal arts Catholic colleges too, and I could focus on the classroom, and then when I turned to research, it was almost like the stakes were less. It was like a bonus. It was like freeing, and so it was actually easier to do research in that sense because of that balance that I had. So.
Yeah, well, I feel like it makes the writing easier, and that's true of the book that I'm going to be talking about in the lecture. Because you can think about the writing as a conversation and as something that's going to be teaching. It takes some of the pressure off of like, oh, I'm going to be sharing this with only experts. Like, hopefully people who want to learn about the discipline will be reading it. And then you remember, those are my students. Those are people who have really good questions. They're really smart. They might not know your material, but they're bringing something to the book and the ideas as well. So it makes writing feel different.
Yeah, and maybe that's a way to transition to sort of talking about the book, because I did teach it in my honors section. Like, this little chapter, the chapter on Paul and the body of Christ and with the disability justice piece of it, like that, and they really liked it for a whole bunch of reasons, and we'll talk about those as well. But one of the things that they definitely liked was that it was accessible for them. Like the reading spoke to them. It made them think, but it wasn't like so complicated that it made them frustrated with it. And I had a variety of different readings in that class, so that when they really both the content and the style and approach to that. So, but anyways.
That makes me really happy because it was written for that kind of audience. It's like non-specialists, but college level. I hoped it could be used in churches or in a classroom.
And I've been thinking more and more about that niche. Not I don't know what to call it. Maybe. I mean, the term I've been using, which is probably not accurate, but public theology, a really insightful, intelligent theology, but one that's sort of meant to be read sort of publicly. And we have this like the academic theology, which is really important, but it's us talking to each other in technical terms, which is fun and lovely, but also that sort of dimension of speaking to an audience that's intelligent, but not sort of versed in the nuances of the field. So anyways, it worked well.
Good. Well, and my hope is, I really think that everybody deserves good theology, right? If I weren't doing this kind of teaching, I'd be doing some other kind of teaching, maybe at the high school level, because I think that the church is not always the best at serving young adults, right? I think that's a population where a lot of people leave the church because there's this gap. They're like, okay, everything I learned when I was a kid doesn't quite work for the kinds of questions that I'm asking now. And I'm not necessarily like an adult with those kinds of questions about family and kids that the church is maybe better at answering. So there's this gap of like, people have real questions and they deserve good theology that's accessible, that it takes them seriously. And
and what worked, because I do that in my theology classes too, like what worked when you were 8 is not going to work at 18.
Right.
But also what you got at 18 is not going to work at 28 and 48 and 68. And so it's this kind of like, you need to keep developing that theology. And if you don't get a good theology that can sort of expand over time, it really can be limiting.
And I think a lot of people, like I meet people on planes and they ask, what do you do? And then you get into this conversation, and then a lot of times it's like, oh, well, the church taught me this and it doesn't hold up. And I'm like, right, that was something that maybe you got in catechesis when you were very young. And we can, come back to that and explore it. Right?
Yeah, what was going on, and
Yeah.
what was the sort of context for that? Yeah, okay. My relatives will ask me questions about that time, and they're pretty well formed, but there's also like, back in elementary school, I was told this. What do you make of that?
Yeah.
So yeah, so that's good. So the book is on Paul's models of belonging, reforming the household of God. How did you get to that topic? Like that, the thing that first, even before I used it in class, that was the topic that sort of grasped me, the sense of belonging. Mm-hmm. So how did you get to that topic?
Sure.
Why do you think it's important?
Again, sort of through a sideways, if I have to tell the story. So my focus in my primary work is on 4th century Christian theologians and writing biographies. Mm-hmm. But I've always been interested in literary mechanics and how metaphors work, sort of to explain what it means to be an exemplary figure like a saint. What sorts of images give people access to that in a text.
Yeah.
So then when I'm teaching graduate courses and undergraduate courses here at St. Mary's, those metaphors keep coming up, and I feel drawn to think with students about how those metaphors are relevant to them. I'm really great at thinking about how are those metaphors relevant in the 4th century, because that's a context that I live and immerse myself in. But the modern day, right? Mm. Why does this still matter? Because biblical texts are living texts for faith communities. So what does that mean for them to be living? And it's an observation that is not new in biblical studies, but is maybe new to people approaching biblical studies, that like the metaphors that Paul was using are metaphors that he's drawing in the 1st century from his social world. They make a ton of sense in his cultural context. And you can approach this understanding Paul by trying to learn as much about the 1st century context as you can, right? Yeah. You can like look at images of Roman architecture and see like when he talks about I don't know any image. When he's talking about things, what is going on in his world that he's picking up on and then sharing with people so that they understand it. But it's also important to then say, what do we see in our world when we hear these metaphors? So when Paul says soldier of Christ, soldier means one thing in the 1st century. Soldier means something maybe really different now, especially in military city. Yeah. Does that image, become a soldier of Christ, resonate with us in the same way that Paul might have intended as an author? Even if it doesn't work the way he intended, how does it work? Yeah. And so inviting students to be curious about that was really the project of the book. And so it came out of teaching classes and thinking about reception history, how these texts changed their meaning over time because of the readers who are reading them and co-constructing that meaning.
Yeah, we taught, in my previous place of employment, we had a class called First Theology. It was basically intro to the Bible. Mm-hmm. And one of the texts we dealt with was Corinthians, 1 Corinthians, Paul's metaphor of the body. And we were this frustrated because the students would always come up with the connection that, oh, it's about like diversity, right? Which there's true, it's a nice sort of connection, but like they're trying to sort of grasp like its ancient significance, the sort of differences that it might have, the similarities to this concept, but also how it's not quite the sort of same thing, but that how they were receiving it was very different. It was precisely because of their context and the things that they sort of valued. So yeah.
And the project is to become aware of that, right?
Yeah.
And then you become, I don't necessarily like the judgmental language of better reader, but you become a more creative reader, a more aware reader when you come at these texts, thinking like, where am I sitting? What's my context that I bring as well?
Yeah. I always think of it as, how would I put it? Like, I came to enjoy reading more the more I understood it, and that was for me it. I remember this was way back in my college days, and I was a math major, and I was floating around these philosophy theology classes, and just had an Old Testament class, and we were walking through Genesis, and I just remember this moment of like, oh, I don't have to read this in a fundamentalist sense or a literal sense. Like, there's these other aspects, and those are very interesting. And it was this kind of freeing moment that then suddenly there was all of this kind of more interesting insights, a different way to sort of approach it. And it was a very liberating sort of moment for me. And that's why I always think of it. Like, it's just this, like, if you can get to those other dimensions, it can be a lot more nourishing, I think.
And I think it helps you get beyond just the text itself. Like, the text is at the center, but that text is written by someone in a community for communities, and we're a community today reading it. So it's not what does the text say, but what does the text say to whom in what context, right? And I think it's almost a more interesting question. This tells you I'm a literary historian, right? But I'm more interested in who wrote it and why did they write it this way and who was reading it than trying to unpack, like, what is it that I'm supposed to get out of this? Like, I want to know, what is it doing? How does it work? That's much more interesting.
Well, I'm an ethicist, so I'm like, what is this doing? What should we be doing? So I'm on the other end of that, coming out of that. But yeah, I could definitely appreciate those perspectives. Of the metaphors you explored of Paul, which one did you find the most interesting, and which one do you think students did? Which did students find the most interesting, or do you think they would find the most interesting? So one from you and one from your sense of how it would be received.
So there are 5 metaphors,
and
I picked them because they have to do with this question of belonging, right? Mm-hmm. Paul is trying to create communities of diverse populations. He's got Jews and Gentiles, slave and free, women and men. He's trying to say all of us belong.
Yeah.
How do you do that in a society that's very stratified? So he picks these metaphors that don't always talk about equality, right? But do talk about belonging and inclusiveness. So I talked about athlete, soldier, slave, child, and body.
Yeah.
I'll start with the student question because that's actually, because I did teach a class
on
this topic, and it was while I was writing the book. So it was designed to, like, let's test this out, right? Read this modern test case and see what you think about it.
Those can be very exciting classes. So
it's my favorite kind of teaching.
Yeah.
I think that students responded with the most animation to the athlete chapter. And it was partly because we were talking about Colin Kaepernick. And this was a story that some of them knew and some of them did not know very well. And so we raised this question of, what does it mean to be an athlete who's very much in the public eye and to have a political stance that is divisive? And we look at athletes today as spokespersons, as examples for children. We expect them maybe to stay in their lane and not to be activists. I think that's going away in the wake of the Kaepernick controversy. But what do we expect of an athlete today? And when then Paul says, I'm running a race, I'm an athlete waiting to earn a crown, how is that resonating with us in a way that is maybe very different with celebrity culture than athletes in the first century? And so that gave them a lot to think about. And then I think they were a little surprised that, like, athletes in the first century actually were celebrities sometimes, especially gladiators. Like, people drew graffiti of their favorite gladiator, had a lot of betting on horse races. So that Paul is maybe not as different from us on that point as we might expect. But there's still some things when we expect a lot of an athlete, do we support them? Cities expected a lot of an athlete in the first century, but they also sent them out as a representative, and so they funded them, cared for them, and celebrated their victory. Do we do the same for our athletes when we know that football players in particular often deal with head injuries, traumatic brain injury? Are there places where we as a community can step up to help them feel like they belong rather than just being like the poster child, right? So there were a lot of good questions, and students asked really good questions about that.
And that is interesting to think of the athlete, the modern athlete, like as the individual that stands apart rather than as a member of a community. And that's, because they are, both not just as a team, but also within the sport and within the communities that they sort of inhabit. That's interesting.
When I think about now, like if I were rewriting the book now, looking at folks like Simone Biles, or who is the tennis player, Naomi Osaka, who are dealing with like mental health challenges and their athleticism and the expectations that society puts on them to tough it out, right, instead of to take care of themselves. That kind of thing seems significant.
And like I'm just thinking of Simone, like she has to sort of pull up her like individual strength to stand up against that apparatus rather than the apparatus being something that's supporting her sort of health. And that it's an amazing achievement and a good model, but it's also like she's left to herself sometimes.
Sustainable.
And
then Paul's letters then can point us back to what it means to support an athlete in the community, because Paul sees himself as an athlete who is running on behalf of the community, and then when they have achievements, he celebrates with them, right? And their success is how he's going to earn his victory crown. So if we think in that way,
Right.
my goodness, wasn't Paul offering us something that allows us to be a better community and create belonging?
Yeah.
So that's one that I think resonated really well with the students. They can tell you, right? They can tell you whether that's true. But from my perception teaching it, they seemed engaged. And then I guess the one that felt most compelling to me was children. And if you've looked at the book, right, in that chapter, I do talk about the sex abuse crisis in the Catholic Church and other Christian churches and other institutions where a person who is in a position of trust abuses that trust, right, and does amazing damage. And that seems like something that is incredibly important, that should be talked about, that is essential for creating belonging where people feel safe. And that's not to say that people who have experienced that kind of abuse need to come back and belong, right? It's saying, but how can we make a space that is safe for people to share their experiences if they wish to do so, and to do repair that needs to happen. So that was maybe the most important one for me. So thinking with that metaphor of child, we think of child as a protected category. But when Paul talks about child, yes, it's a protected category, but it's also someone who is headed towards maturity and headed towards responsibility, right? To be a child of God means to be a co-heir with Christ, which means you're going to inherit everything, which means you have responsibilities. So to say I'm a child of God in the church doesn't just mean I need to be protected and cared for. It also means I'm inheriting this and I have responsibility for it. And so how can I shape the community to which I belong? And I think for many people today, belonging, at least for myself, I'll speak only for myself. My understanding of belonging to the church is not being served by an institution. It's taking ownership for this community of which I am a part, and being an adult full participant in that, and making sure that it is the kind of church that I want to see and belong to. So that one feels like a sort of empowerment chapter in some ways, that what is belonging? Belonging can empower you. If it's true belonging, then you have ownership and you have a real stake in that community to which you belong.
That's interesting. It got me thinking. It's like two things at the same time. In grad school, my ecclesiology professor was like, every time you read Catholic Church, figure out what's talking about. Is it like, can you substitute that for clergy, or is it people of God, or is it? And that will tell you what they're sort of meaning by that. And part of his emphasis was like, the church is not just clergy, and it's not just the institutional piece. It is this kind of community things, and that's important for conceive how you do your theology and how to think about sort of the church. That I think that was the empowerment piece, that your sense is just you and this kind of responsibility. But it also got me thinking about, I did stuff on Mr. Rogers, some research on Mr. Rogers, and a bunch of pieces of that resonated with it, but he has this sense of incremental responsibility. So if you watch in his shows, he has stuff, he goes back, he's got kind of three components. He'll have stuff that kids can do themselves, like kind of crafts things. Sometimes then he'll take a field trip to show kind of what adults are doing. And then he'll go off to the neighborhood to make believe, which is like this imaginative piece where you can kind of think through different options. And this is part of this was his way of like trying to build responsibility, the things you can do now, things you can think about, but also things to model yourself after that you might not be sort of ready for it. And it was just a way of like, how as a kid do you take responsibility? You can't expect them to run the thing, but you can also let them see how it's being run and then talk about the things that they can do, and it provides that sort of growth in there as well. So I
mean, that's a very Pauline model, right? Like when I was a child, I did childish things, and now that I'm grown, I do grown-up things. Like, and we still don't understand what it's going to be in the distant future.
It's the funny thing about Rogers is that all of the Christianity is so underneath the surface of all of those pieces. So that's what I nice there as well. How did you? Part of the reason why I wanted you to sort of come speak is to take that sort of research and think about human flourishing, which is the theme there. And so, talk about how you see that connection, or if it's easier to talk more broadly, why do you think belonging would be important for us today? Because again, that was one of my attractions to not only the book originally, but also to having you sort of speak publicly. Like, I feel like this is a really important topic that I'm starting to see lots of people thinking about it. So
So I was thinking about this question.
Good. I mean, this is my ethics piece, by the way. Like, yeah, and it's also moving from your interest in texts and how it's working in the models and the literary analysis, and I'm asking my ethics question.
Like how does the rubber hit the road, right? I think that belonging is. I'm coming up with lots of different words. Right? This is my like exegete part.
Perfect.
Like, do I want to say it's foundational to flourishing? Do I want to say it's essential to flourishing? I think about necessary and sufficient conditions. Is this one's like necessary? It's not the only thing that allows for flourishing, but like you need to have
some good honor,
right? Yeah. It's come from math, right?
Yes.
So like, okay, so it's a core of flourishing, and one of the things that I really like about Pauline metaphors and the variety of metaphors, right? Because Paul could have just chosen one.
Yeah.
He chose 5, and then there are like a bunch more as well.
Yeah.
There are so many ways to understand your belonging, and it doesn't have to be belonging to a community of human beings all the time. It can be belonging to a relationship with God. It can be belonging as a creature in the natural world. It can be belonging to yourself, like people who feel that disconnect or disassociation from their bodily self. Like, what does that mean to belong in your body? So belonging means a lot of different things. And I think one or more of those allow you to then feel free to flourish. So you were talking about liberation earlier. Belonging sets us free, right? When you belong, you have this affirmation. As much as we say, like, don't worry about what other people think of you, like, belonging gives you affirmation that, like, I am worthy, right? It reinforces your dignity as a person. And so then you are free to pursue what brings you joy, to take a risk, to ask big questions. So that's how I see, like, it's a base from which to do the other things that help you be a person, right?
Yeah, and it speaks to me in a bunch of ways, which is so often you need, like in sports, you need a good coach. You can have terrible coaches, but a good coach can really kind of help you out. You need good friends that can sort of sustain you, and both to celebrate with in good times, but also when times are difficult, that they'll support and sort of help you, commiserate with you as well. You need good teachers, you need good mentors, like you need like all of those things when they're there, that sense of belonging really to grow and change. And growing and change is really important, but not always easy.
Right.
And that's in the best of circumstances. And so if you had more challenging things into that as well. Yeah.
And I think it's, so an essential aspect of flourishing, especially today, I think, is getting away from attaching our value to productivity. Like we're in a work-obsessed society. That's the thing that makes it, that's why you matter. And the more you belong to communities that see you for you and see your value, the more you can be free to do the things outside of work, right? So taking leisure time, doing crafts, reading a book, spending time with friends, those things that add deeper value than monetary value. And belonging is what sort of facilitates that, right?
We had an earlier speaker talking about burnout, and part of his analysis of it was that there's a bunch of different ways to think about it, but one of them was that when your identity gets wrapped up in your sort of productivity and your job, and then you can't sort of separate those two things, and so your whole worth becomes, what am I producing?
Right.
Or what kind of revenue am I generating? And that can increase burnout, but it also makes you very insecure. Insecure. I don't mean like necessarily just emotionally insecure, but like you're always then having to work extra to demonstrate your sort of value, and then you're constantly measured by these external sort of pieces. But your own worth as an individual, or the contributions that you make over time, none of that seems to matter. Or your relationship to your family, or to the importance of friends, and all of those things get kind of lost in that sense of productivity.
And it makes things feel contingent, right? Like I'm only worth it if.
Yes.
And belonging, I think helps us throw that out the window, that like I belong, therefore the things that I do and the things that I want to pursue are of value.
Yeah.
Like that's, I mean, you're an ethicist, so we don't want to go crazy on that, right? It gives you more freedom.
And then it helps you to think about the stuff that you do as how thinking about the community context for it, and so you're not. It has that sort of reference point on it. And I'm just thinking about the way in which teaching, as you said, shaped your sort of research and shaped my research too. Like those questions and those dialogues come back into what you write, how you write, and what you think about, and how you frame questions.
We don't just put scholarship out there like because I thought this was interesting. That has value, right? But the more it's like, this is a thing that other people might be interested in too. That's, the communities to which I belong shape the way that I ask those questions.
Yeah, and I was thinking too, because I've been trying to make sure that I do things that are just for fun and not just instrumental value. And I think sometimes there's something with colleges where everything has to be like, oh, I'm doing this for my class or doing this for research, I'm reading books for these kinds of things, and to try to check that and just read or watch stuff or do things that are just for fun. And it's like actually an intentional practice I've been trying to do precisely to kind of reclaim those sort of dignity piece. And it's just, my son's doing really competitive soccer right now, and I keep having to remind him, like, it should be fun, right? Like, you should be having fun. And even that, like, youth sports gets really quickly instrumentalized, very sort of quickly. You can't, like, I languished for years as a terrible Little League player, but you're still able to play. But like, you participate or be different just because you enjoy these things as opposed to those things. And that's an important piece, I think, to reclaim both belonging and sort of dignity. Yeah, that's good. All right, my last question, which is always like the sabotage question, and because I'm asking people to predict the future, but which is, your thoughts on the future of the Catholic intellectual tradition. And I've been thinking about this for a while. I think the world's changing.
Yep.
I think if we knew how to change, we would all do that. We don't know, so we're not. But especially people that are coming to talk and thinking through ideas, just sort of musings on the future. And I won't hold you accountable for any answer. So.
Okay. I'm not going to check if my prediction
No.
So in the classic sort of teacher way, I'm going to answer this by telling you how I'm going to answer it. Does that, when you ask me a question like that, I have to explain why I'm answering it. So I'm a historian. So my answer is going to be that the future is coming out of something that we already know about, right? So the more we have a historical consciousness, we can sort of tap into and understand the richness of the tradition that's there, the better equipped we are to both think creatively about how we want it to be different and to build on, we don't have to reinvent the wheel, right? So I think that the future of the Catholic intellectual tradition, whatever that means, right? It's huge. It's a huge category.
It's a term that you made to kind of describe something, but the boundaries of it are pretty fluid.
But I think it's determined by the people who are doing it. And the thing that makes me excited about it is that there are people thinking in a Catholic context, thinking with Catholic tradition now, who were not doing that kind of thinking years ago. I'm, again, like 1st, 4th century, it was mostly men. It was mostly clergy or ministers or people who had authority in the community. It was mostly people who were very attached to the structure of the institution, attached to wealth, right? Attached to a certain form of education. And today there's just so much more variety in the kinds of people who are thinking and playing with ideas. And so that makes it more inclusive. It creates more space for belonging. I think it gives us room to really dance with the Holy Spirit, right? How the Holy Spirit wants to move. I think that there is more room for creativity than there ever has been. And of course that comes with, like in the book, I talk about promise and peril. I want to focus on the promise. The perils of that are that people want to shut down those conversations, or it feels like it's too new or different. And what I really hope for is openness, right? To explore, here's a voice that we've never heard before. Actually listen and see how it plays with the rest of the tradition. If it pushes us in a brand new direction, should we be scared by that, or should we go with it and see what happens? So I think it's a very on the verge of being an incredibly open tradition. It's been getting more and more expansive, and that's what I'd like to see. So,
yeah. I can't quite remember where I picked it up in, but Catholic means wholeness, like, and so part of the idea of having more voices is to be more whole, and that if there's not those voices in there, you're like, the whole community is missing something. Like, you're not hearing the pieces that are there. And I know there's, communities are more complicated than that, but that does seem that that's a key piece of this, where you have voices and those are heard and those are important, but if there's some that are left out, there's just something missing. You're not whole as a community or a person.
Yeah, and it's not that every voice has to speak to everyone, right? Because I teach, I write books. Not everybody's gonna have that resonance or that feeling that, like, this is for me. But that's why I'm not writing alone, and that's when we think about Catholic theology. It's a dialogical exercise. It's a communal exercise. Like, it's not something that we do on our own.
Yeah, and it is, and even thinking more broadly about the church too, because my faith has always been nourished by my intellectual sort of studies, and it was surprising to me that that's not everybody's journey. And it really is it is a part of people's lives, but or sometimes it's a part in the early ages or when they're older, but some it's not. Sometimes it's much more practice, and sometimes it's just the daily kind of devotions that are there, and all of that's kind of part of the church, and trying to hold those pieces together. And then trying to pay attention to things that are outside my realm of interest. And that's exciting though.
Yeah.
You find all sorts of fun things. Well, thank you very much. I really
thank
appreciate it. Thanks.